D'abord, je voudrais dire merci pour l'invitation de venir ici à la Convention SFEN. Mais comme la plupart de mes compatriotes, je me méfie un petit peu avec mon français, donc je pense que je vais parler anglais. Pour moi, c'est plus facile, je pense. On essaie, mais voilà. I think first thing I would just like to say is just some apologies. Mark Foy, who heads up our civil nuclear reactor program, would have liked to come here to Paris today to talk to you. Unfortunately, he has a clash. He's in Vienna at a meeting that was previously organised, so he couldn't make it. Just to give you a few words about me, because you're probably wondering, who is he? I work as part of the Hinkley Point ONR team. We're involved in the current regulation of the project. I was also involved in the GDA process on both the EPR and on the Westinghouse AP1000. And some of the things I will talk to you about this morning are really about ONR's approach and some of the things that we've learned. And I hope that you find them interesting, because for us, Hinkley is a hugely important project. New build is hugely important in terms of what ONR does. And obviously we have a key role in all of these projects in helping them be successful. I'll start off with one or two interesting words, though. For a regulator, the word partnership is always an interesting one. We're never quite sure who we partner with. And I'll just really give you a few words about what our role is, and perhaps you can then see why I say that. The first thing, of course, is that we are independent of government and industry. So we are an independent body. We have in-house a high degree of technical expertise in terms of providing scrutiny over designs and over technologies and over operations. Jean-Paul this morning mentioned several challenges, one of which is really about public acceptability. And one of the things that ONR is trying very hard to do is work in a very open and transparent way, because essentially we act on behalf of the public and Parliament in ensuring that whatever nuclear operations and facilities are present in the UK, they're operated safely and they match our expectations in securing people, society and the environment from the hazards of the nuclear industry. And one thing that is always strange, but the Office for Nuclear Regulation, we're the regulator, so we are really nuclear neutral. One of the things that we're doing on new build is really government. You can see it's a key strategic goal for the government to ensure that we get nuclear new build into the UK. ONR's role in that is really about making sure that those projects are undertaken safely, securely, with due regard to the environment. If another government came in and decided it didn't want nuclear, our role would be essentially to manage whatever that government wanted in terms of decommissioning. So we are a nuclear neutral organisation, I would say. But it's very important to kind of understand that. And hopefully some of the things I will talk about, it will make it clear. We face some obvious challenges for I'll focus more now on the Hinkley Point project, and these are the things I just want to talk about this morning. First of all, what the challenge is, both the collective challenge and the challenge for ONR. I'll mention some key parts of UK safety legislation, because as both Vincent and Philippe have mentioned, there are differences between expectations in the UK and expectations in France, and also between the working methods between ONR and perhaps ASN. And they need to be understood by all parties to enable everybody to succeed, I think. I'll give you a quick overview about how we intend, or how we are regulating new build projects. Hinkley is key because it's pathfinding for us, so we are learning a huge amount. I think we are very, very grateful, to be honest, that we are working with such organisations like EDF, who bring in a huge amount of UK understanding and a huge amount of nuclear expertise. So on this first key project, this is actually really, really important in terms of making a success for that project, but also helping us learn for the future. I use a word here. Our role is very much timely regulation of new build projects. One of the things that we don't want to do in ONR is cause any undue stoppage or time delay to any project. Now that means we still have to make sure that any project meets UK expectations. So it poses a collective challenge for all of us in terms of what does the regulatory body need, and how does a project fulfil that? And that's the key part that I will talk about this morning. The challenges are really pretty obvious for everybody. On time, on budget. I think that's very much in Vincent and Philippe's kind of area. Safe, secure and environmentally acceptable. Obviously that's something that they are really wanting to achieve, but obviously that's the part that ONR is really interested in. And our role is very much this business about timely regulation. We need to try and make sure that we can undertake our assessments, make our judgments on the timescale that the project needs. Now, obviously, we'll only do that if it's safe and acceptable to do so. If we need more time for assessment or more time to make a judgment, or there are significant safety issues, obviously we'd have to have a pause or something, but we're all working extremely hard to try and avoid that. And we are independent from government. Now, part of the challenge is really pretty obvious. In the UK, for Hinkley, ONR is really keen to make sure that we try and learn as much as possible from some of the nuclear projects, new build projects that have gone in advance. So obviously, Olkiluoto in Finland and Flamanville, but Taishan as well. So what we're wanting to do is see as much of that learning, as much retour d'expérience as possible are coming into the Hinkley project, not just on the design and the safety case, but also just look at lessons learned on the construction, the supply chain management, and all of those types of issues. There are some key aspects of UK safety legislation that it's kind of quite important to understand, because it actually determines very much how ONR behaves and how we operate. In the UK, the law from the Energy Act and the Health and Safety at Work Act really mean that most of ONR's legal powers come over a licensee. So Vincent mentioned the site license and EDF getting a site license. That was granted to NNB Genco as being the legal entity in the UK that would be responsible for the project. ONR really only has significant legal powers over that licensee. So that's an important thing that determines the way that we operate. And what we expect from the licensee is that it must have effective oversight and capability to control all of the activities. We talk a lot in the UK about intelligent customer capability. So that's something that is very, very important to us. As I found out working on the project, one of the significant differences between, I think, here in France and the UK is our concept of, in the Health and Safety at Work Act, it's so far as is reasonably practicable. So you have to reduce risks to so far as reasonably practicable. In the nuclear world, we know it as a LARP, so as low as reasonably practicable. And that has had some impact, I would say, on certain aspects of our work and the way that we've interacted with NNB and with EDF. So as I mentioned, NNB ultimately, for us, is our licensee. So for ONR, that's the organisation that we look to. Many people this morning have mentioned the GDA process. GDA for us it's a voluntary process. It's not part of regulation. But the key thing about the GDA process is it's really there to try and reduce risks for all parties. And coming back to the conversation from earlier on the first session, one of the things that we want to do is try and make it easy for people using the same design. So if we've had an EPR, well, on the next EPR projects, we wouldn't be undertaking the same degree of scrutiny at all. We'd really just be focusing on site aspects. So GDA potentially gives many advantages to an organisation. So I would expect now that for future projects like Sizewell C, it should be much shorter, quicker, easier, I hope. There will be issues, but that's the intention, that once you've got a GDA, then we don't go back through those things. Site licensing is a key process for us. And really, site licensing is partly about the site, but it's also hugely about making sure that the licensee organisation has the capability to essentially provide oversight over the project, not just in the operating phase, but all of the previous phases of the project. And we're certainly finding that with many of the overseas parties coming in, this is the first thing that they really have to understand. Many of them come in with a model where they're expecting that the licensee will merely be the operating organisation, and there will be another organisation that will deal with all of the project construction design. But no, at site license, at the licensing phase, we want to make sure that the licensee is capable of controlling that project. I won't go through GDA in any detail. It's 4 steps. Hinckley's been through it, so that was very successful. We learnt a huge amount from the GDA process, and I'll talk a little bit more about that because it comes very much into my areas of work. During licensing, one of the things that we do is we provide a lot of advice and guidance to organisations coming into new build, so that we try and help them understand about UK context and what's expected. That takes a long time. So we're normally telling prospective licensees that they really need 3 to 4 years to do that. I'm now going to move very much more into Hinckley specific, because that's where we are at the moment, in the early stages of the project. This is our purpose, essentially to regulate that project. But that means, of course, that we really need to understand and work with a huge number of stakeholders. Beyond the Hinckley project, it means that we need to understand government policy. We need to understand the demand that's coming in, because potentially on resources, we have to look at how many GDA processes or how many licensing processes we can support. And that always has an impact potentially on the Hinckley project, because we're an organisation that's resource limited. So we have to make sure that we can preserve and keep people working on the Hinckley project. I'm hoping that's what it's going to look like in a few years' time, but it's just a reminder of where we are. Now, Philippe, I think it was actually Lord Hutton mentioned this morning, we've not done this for 20 years. I think I worked on the Sizewell project, and I'm getting very old now, and I think it's at least 25 years. But the key thing with so many people involved on a Hinckley project is we've not done this for 25 years. As a regulator, we haven't done this. Sizewell B, the last time we did this, was fully funded, government funded. This is a completely commercial venture now on Hinckley. And the whole basis of the project is once they start construction, they really don't want to stop. And we understand that. And we want to make sure that, as regulators, we've done the right things to make sure that EDF and NNB, when they start, they can continue. We're not going to hold any part of the project back. That means that our strategy, the new reactor construction strategy, needs to be very flexible and agile, but we still have to be very effective and robust. So it's not about reducing standards, but it's about finding ways of working with NNB, Genco and EDF and all of the other partner organisations involved in the project to make sure that we can do that. We have 4, we call them cornerstone areas. There's obviously one big one, which is design and safety case. That really builds on all of the work that was done at GDA. License compliance, because as most of our legal powers come from the license conditions, license compliance to us is very important. And during construction, that will start to get, and commissioning, that will start to increase because that's where our legal powers lie. I head up a team on organisational capability, which is really looking at the readiness of the project at any particular stage to proceed. So the construction side, Philippe was talking a lot about supply chain partners and building up a real understanding about nuclear. One of the things I'm very impressed with in terms of NNB and EDF is it's really instilling a whole, they call it nuclear construction excellence philosophy. So nuclear construction excellence now for nuclear safety in the future. So there's a lot of work that's going on in building that in the supply chain and building that thinking in the construction partners. That's an area that we're very interested in my area. And then lastly, the fourth cornerstone is security. So that's terrorist security. C'est pas la sécurité de l'employé. Conventional safety, that is the security of employees, and fire safety. And a lot of what we do is really about trying to build confidence in the licensee processes. We can't look at everything, and nor do we want to look at everything. We want to have confidence that the licensee and the processes that are set up in the project are really effective and robust. There's going to be about 5 key consents where NNB will come to ONR and formally ask permission to continue at various points. This actually represents a lot of regulatory risk to ONR. If you compare it with Sizewell B from 25 years ago, there were 25 points to control the project. So we're trying to reduce the number of formal points. That's in part to try and make sure that we don't put unnecessary burden on the project. So that's some of the things that we're trying to do. Now, for many of you, I imagine that it's actually the devil is in the detail. C'est toujours le diable est dans les détails, je pense. So it's been very important trying to find effective ways of working together to meet each of our goals. There was a DAC that was granted a couple of years ago. But one of the things that came at the end of that, we had a very strong recognition amongst all of the parties involved that we really needed to improve communications and understanding between the organisations. If any of you have worked, doesn't really matter whether it's UK, France, it's almost as soon as you start working internationally in a different country, you'll find this. You tend to find we're using the same words, but we've all got a different understanding of what they mean. We would frequently find during GDA that at the end of meetings, EDF and Arriva, the requesting party, would go away with a different understanding from the meeting than ONR had. And we would only find out weeks or months later, when something then was represented to us, that things had gone wrong. Why? Because quite often people weren't understanding UK context. A lot was something that was very new in France. And one of the things that all of us were doing is we were all referencing back to different reference points. So different standards, different norms, a different understanding of what any given set of words meant. So those were different. Recording was another one. During GDA, it was very, very obvious there was some very high quality thinking that was done within EDF on EPR design and in Arriva. However, it was much more difficult trying to find documented evidence. And as a public regulator, documented evidence is something that is very important to us. So we ended up with a considerable number of relationship challenges. I mean, these were, in one sense, small, but in reality, they were important to get beyond to make sure that we could move into something that was more efficient, more effective, that was going to keep time and pace with the project. So these were some of the things that we really noticed. ASN was different to ONR. The responsible designers, so that would be EDF DIN in CNEN, CNEPE, SEPTEN, they were used to working with ASN. Our approaches in O&R are very different. A lot was different. And as we moved from GDA into the current phase on construction, we now ended up with 3 discrete entities. We've got O&R, its licensee, NNB Genco, and then a huge degree of support coming from the French arm of EDF in its nuclear design capability in CNEPE. So that was, again, a new set of relationships that we had to understand. O&R's legal powers are only over NNB Genco. So that means that we've always been looking to NNB. But of course, a huge amount of this support is coming from EDF in DIN. So we had to find and make sure that we all clearly understood each other's roles. We had to find ways of working together in an effective way. And the keys, I think, for what I call timely regulation, right at the outset, Colin Patchett, who was the acting chief inspector in O&R, and Chris Backen, who was heading up the for NNB on the HPC project, always talked about early engagement, no surprises. We wanted to de-risk things as much as possible, so that meant talking a lot and really starting to build a lot of understanding as early as we could in the project. So right after EDA, there was a senior level workshop, so that took people in from nearly all of the DIN entities, Chris, Colin, senior people from O&R, really to start to understand what had been the challenges during the GDA and what we needed to do differently. So that was very useful because it really helped a much greater understanding. And that allowed us to start to build better relationships and better understanding. There's been NNB and EDF have done an awful lot, I think, in terms of building partnership and understanding between the UK and the French norms, between secondments, between the UK nationals and French people. So somebody like Robert P, I think, is absolutely a key move to help NNB understand the French side, and there have been similar positions that have happened the other way around. We have a lot of routine dialogue. We have 4 levels of meeting, so level 4 is very much working level. And to try and give you an understanding of what that means, I think last month I was asking how many meetings did we have? It was 20 meetings, so 20 working level meetings. So that's a huge degree of involvement at the minute, really trying to maximise the de-risking opportunities that we've got at the minute. Level 3 is very much the project management meeting, so we try and make sure that we work together to understand whether we've got blockages, whether our regulatory teams are causing undue problems, and what we need to do to make sure that we actively manage the risks that arise from the project. And then level 1 goes up to very senior levels that I don't normally get involved in. But that's been important. We do a lot of routine sharing of plans. We need to understand NNB and EDF's plans to devise our intervention strategies. They need to understand our plans to make sure that they can build in the time for O&R engagement, O&R assessment, and our judgments. So we've been doing a lot of working together on that. And there's been a lot more support provided to help the French side understand UK context and what that means. And early on, we had it's called O&R facilitation. I actually had a role of going around all 3 organisations, really trying to understand the challenges and the problems, such that we could then collectively work out what we needed to do to get over those. I'm told that's been very successful. I don't know, but it certainly seems to have helped quite a lot. There are some noticeable differences between the way that perhaps ASN work and the way that O&R works. Certainly this is from my conversations with people in CNEN and CNEPE and SEPTEN, but you're much better off talking to them to find out about differences between ASN and O&R. I don't know, I've never had to work for ASN. For us, for O&R, visibility of the journey is very important. for two real reasons. It helps build confidence in processes. The more confidence we have, the more we'll feel comfortable about not having to intervene in the future. And understanding the options that are considered is very important for a LARP. So again, this was one of the kind of the key things. ONR engagement, we were finding when I talked to some of the people in Cannes, at fairly senior positions, they said in 20 years they'd never ever talked to somebody from ASN. I think if you go and talk in Cannes to people who are working on the HPC project, an awful lot of them will have met an ONR inspector in working level meetings. So we're quite different in the way that we work. And documentation is different. And again, I think that this is one of the challenge, well, it's not a challenge, but it's one of the things that's just needed to be understood. So again, those practices have changed. And a LARP has been an issue, but I think that has largely disappeared. Knowing that many of the people in the room are really going to be part and parcel of the potential supply chain for Hinckley, you might say, well, what's the level of interest ONR has in the supply chain? Well, we have an enormous interest in the supply chain, but we don't regulate it. So our interest is really very much looking for assurance that the licensee is looking after the supply chain. Now, we are interested in all of the issues that Philippe had mentioned in terms of supply chain quality, whether the companies that are used have really understood nuclear and things like that. So both on the UK side and the French side, there will be a high degree of interest, but we won't be coming along and regulating you. Ultimately, the level that might get involved will depend very much on how the licensee chooses to parcel out its contracts. So you can see that for an awful lot of the design and safety case work going out to Cannes and Canepe, that means that they have a huge degree of interaction with us. For most other supply chain partners, you're very unlikely to really come across us, I would say. I think the current position is, I would say, excellent. I think that we've achieved a very good level of understanding now and working relationships between all of the key parties, which is really important. The schedule is, and I think will become increasingly demanding for everybody, and that means that we, ONR, we don't want to be a risk to the project schedule. But it does mean that we have to make sure that we've worked together to understand what are the things that we want, what deliverables we want for technical assessment. Time is built in to make sure that we can undertake assessments and come to judgments. So that has meant, or is meaning, that there is a huge degree of working together, but we still have to make sure that we each respect each other's positions. ONR ultimately remains the regulator, and that's what we have to do. There are some technical issues. I'm pretty confident that all of those are going to be resolved. I personally don't see anything that's fundamental that we won't get beyond. And the big thing that I see at the minute is a huge degree of willingness amongst all of the parties to make it work. Thank you. That's all I'm going to say this morning.